Okay, so I just recorded a podcast with Neil Seligman. Neil is a mindfulness expert and he runs The Conscious Professional. So he goes into businesses and runs workshops encouraging organizations to bring mindfulness into the workplace. And it's amazing how a different approach, a more human approach, a more conscious approach to business can actually be really good for your bottom line. It can be good for business. We talk about mindfulness, we talk about his story. It's a really interesting podcast, great conversation, and it's the first one that we've done via Zoom. So this is not face to face like I've normally done, but it's remote because right now we're under lockdown and we've got to be doing all this social distancing, and there's a global pandemic going on. So this is a bit of an experiment. I've never done it before. Sound quality is not great, so excuse that. But I hope you enjoy this conversation with mindfulness expert Neil Seligman. Neil, thank you so much for being on my podcast and being a guest. I was quite when you said yes that you would agree to be a guest. I was really pleased because I've kind of touched on mindfulness before with one of my guests, and you're here. You're making a career out of it. You've kind of chosen. You were going down one career path to become a barrister, from what I understand, and now you switched over to mindfulness after, I can imagine, probably some heavy deliberations and things like that. And when was that? Was that in 2012? You've just made that decision?
No. It actually was slightly the other way around as
Yeah.
well, because I came to um, the practice of meditation when I was a teenager, and trained as a Reiki master before I went to uni.
Okay.
Uh, so I'd sort of developed that passion and interest.
So
Um,
Reiki is kind of energy healing. Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an energy healing technique. And I'd sort of learnt that by chance, really, out in America when I was working in a kids camp. There just happened to be a Reiki master there. But that sort of really fueled my interest in all things esoteric.
Okay.
Um, I was already on the path to becoming a barrister.
So
Um,
it's an interesting thing because there's when I kind of talk about meditation and mindfulness and you touch on this kind of spirituality kind of stuff, you get this whole kind of there are some aspects of society who think that that's not the real world and that's not living in the real world. You've got all this kind of woo woo stuff, and then there are other people who completely immerse themselves in that. I try and meditate daily, and even some people think that meditation is just a load of bonkum and nonsense. But there you are. So on the one hand, you've got becoming a barrister, which is very much the so-called real world, and on the other hand, you've got something much more aligned with kind of more spiritual things like Reiki and meditation and things like that. How do you balance that? How do you kind of get those things to work out together?
um, well, I think in the end, they didn't really work out as a sort of um, one lived experience. Like that, I found the balance of um, holding, I suppose, my passion for all of that, but also spending the majority of my time fighting trials in courts. Um, it was a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah.
Um, and people would notice that my energy would be quite different when I would be talking to them about Reiki than when I'd be talking to them about their legal case, as
Yeah.
you would imagine.
Yeah.
um, but for me, it was like noticing that there was a kind of bit of a fracture in my being as a result of performing these two very different roles. And then I had this insight in 2008, I think it was, when I was walking through the car park at the Inner Temple in London, and I'd just been in court all day, and a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for a long time called out to me, said, "Hey," and he said he'd heard that I was one of the rising stars of the civil bar. Um, and nobody had ever said that to me before. But what happened when I heard that was I had this very clear insight drop in that my star was rising in the wrong field, and then I had to leave. So that was actually the catalyst for me letting go of 8 years of practice as a barrister.
That must have
Uh,
been pretty frightening in a way, because when you're a rising star in something that is probably quite lucrative, very highly respected, to then say, actually no, I'm going to leave that kind of certainty and that security and go follow a different passion. It must have been quite a nerve-wracking moment for you.
Um, so as I look back on it, it sort of feels more courageous than it did at the time,
Yeah.
because I sort of like, you sort of get a sense of, wow, that was a lot to give up. But at the time, that insight just felt true,
Okay.
and the resonance of that truth then just sort of reorganized everything in my life around that new clarity. So it just felt very it was clear from that point, and then it was just one foot in front of the other that this is the new direction. Yeah, so it didn't feel courageous at the time.
Do you think you talk about it being true? Do you think that we have a kind of, I kind of refer to it as our intrinsic self, so kind of um, an us that is without all the extra trappings of our experiences and where we've been and the kind of baggage that we accumulate over the years, and that true version of ourselves, when we're living a life that's not aligned with that, we have this kind of deep dissatisfaction. But then, as you discovered, when you realign yourself with your true nature, then suddenly you become much more content, much more happy that you're on the right path and you're doing the right thing, and and life rewards you accordingly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, and I talk quite a lot about that in relation to my own story. I work with a lot of professionals, and it's something which resonates, I think, because what the useful sort of practical outcome of that lesson for me is that alignment is actually a useful alternative to success.
Okay.
And I think when I was growing up, and for a lot of people, a lot of us had that idea that your life journey was about trying to create success in your life, and it looked a certain way, and it meant certain things to different types of people, and all the rest of it. But it was like, okay, that's where we're headed. And alignment for me is really, each time there's a fork in the road, that hopefully you've done a little bit more self-work to understand who you actually are at that essential nature, or the sort of unique self that you're pointing to, so that when there is a decision to make, that you're choosing to step down the road which brings you a little bit closer to who you are. So what you do in the world is actually being informed more and more by who you actually be. So being preceding doing. And I think if we're just after success, and for me, I was kind of an overachiever from an early age and quite indiscriminately was succeeding at things, but then found myself on a path which felt very misaligned to my true nature. Albeit there'd been lots of great learning and things that I loved about my life as it was,
Yeah.
and it does a bit like a past life now. But one of the characteristics was certainly misalignment, and I felt it physically in my body. It wasn't just a sort of mental thing that I felt dissatisfied.
What
I
does
could,
that feel like?
sorry.
What does that feel like?
Um, so for me, the sort of physical aspects where I started to experience pain in my scalp was one of the things I had. It's very specific.
Yeah.
It felt like my head was pushing my hair out of my body. It's like a real sort
Yeah.
of
Wow.
centralized. It's like, um, and it was a very odd feeling, but it was right around that time when I was still doing my job as a barrister. Um, there was about 5 months after I had the insight, when I was wrapping up my practice, um, to enable myself to step away. So sort of being in between those two worlds, and a little bit afterwards, because it took me a long time to then find what was next, or the kind of first step on the next road. Um, So yeah, so just kind of discomfort in the body, but particularly for me, it was in the scalp. So yeah,
It's funny. I mean, people react to stress differently. I mean, when I've been stressed, I've developed kind of stomach conditions. I know people who get sore throats and things like this. And then when they, certainly with me, it was kind of job related. And I know a lot of other people have found the pressure of doing a job that perhaps they enjoy very much, but isn't actually their true calling, if you like, does manifest itself in strange ways. So you do get, um, for some people, it could be something like behavioral characteristics that they might turn to drink or to, um, practice escapism practices. For other people, it can be illnesses and things like this.
yeah,
Um, and it just goes to show the importance of the whole kind of mind, body, spirit type of thing. Um, and to be physically healthy, we have to be spiritually healthy and mentally healthy as well. Um, so, what you talked about finding your next thing. So what is the? It's very easy to say you're a mindfulness practitioner, but what is your kind of message, if you like? What is it that you're teaching?
well, it's become a little bit more broad since I set off all those years ago in a different direction. So the corporate offering, the business is called the Conscious Professional.
Yeah,
Um, so there's a suite of courses and trainings, which really about bringing that message of mindful education and conscious professional skills to busy professionals. Um, and if there's a sort of underlying through line to that, it's that the power of mindfulness allows us to get in touch with ourselves in a different way, build self-awareness, build behavioral awareness, and allows us to become more intentional, which is another way of saying that we're able to become more conscious through these types of practices. And I think in the professional sphere, one of the things that is really important for us to pay attention to and to create from at this time is this sense of trying to come from a space of wisdom rather than just intelligence.
yeah,
And so something I teach a lot through mindfulness and through other practices is the way in which we access the mind as human beings is really important. And most people get taught to access the mind by going straight up to the brain and being smart and brainy and doing it all from there. And that we're very intelligent when we do that, but we also tend to be quite fearful because of our negativity bias and scarcity mindset and the way that we experience ourselves as separate when we go straight to the mind. So practices like mindfulness and yoga and other embodiment practices allow us to bring our awareness into the full physical resources of the human body. So rather than just using one part, if we bring awareness through the body, through the gut, through the heart, and then up into the mind, then when the mind comes on, it's actually accessing intelligence in a different way, which is actually connected. It's more true because it's actually integral to the holistic nature of how life flows through our world. And therefore, the types of solutions that we can come to from that space tend to be much more harmonic and characterized by wisdom rather than intelligence. And instead of creating sort of winners and losers, it's got more of that sort of us within it and the serendipity of connection.
yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what I stand for. And then there's lots of different ways in which I kind of spread that message out. Um,
That's really interesting because I've worked in professional environments where it's been very adversarial. So they motivate people with a kind of a carrot or a stick kind of philosophy, and there's no kind of sense of empowerment or allowing people to thrive. There may be a written kind of statement about personal development or something like that, but ultimately there's a power structure that is often fear-based or especially when you're dealing with things like deadlines or potentially sales targets or stuff like that. There's a lot of, if you don't if you don't hit your targets by this time, then you're in trouble, or if you don't meet your deadlines, you're in trouble. But then conversely, you talk to some of the most successful people. I've spoken to coaches and salespeople, and they talk about the best technique they've ever used for progressing and doing really well is just to speak to people and be inclusive and have conversations. And it's not about selling, it's not about targets anymore. It's just about relating to people as humans
Yeah.
and progressing that way, which is really interesting. You have this kind of one side of things which is driven by data and analytics perhaps and targets, and then there seems to be a much more successful way of doing things which are much more about natural human um, relating to one another and communication and things like that.
Yeah. So I suppose what we're really seeing is an evolution of leadership and management structures from command and control types of structures, which came through the military,
Yeah,
are based out of the consciousness of war. So from that and into a more conscious leadership or mindful leadership, there's lots of different words for it. But that include EQ as much as they include IQ,
yeah,
um, and have much more of a sense of creating through community, of flattening hierarchies, and of collaboration and so on. Empowerment and allowing people to kind of step up and bring their unique gifts and have a voice, and all of those types of things. And where ego, you could get a long way in a command and control environment by having ego that was able to scare other people. But it doesn't work so well in the new models and the younger people coming through businesses. I don't think they're going to tolerate that type of business much longer.
yeah.
I think there's a dying off of that type of leadership. And yeah, it's probably going to be a bit messy in the die off as the sort of old gives way to the new and
You get,
so on.
they call it an extinction burst, don't they? It's the last kind of dying, thrashing about of an old idea. And
Love East.
yeah, extinction burst. And a lot of people are saying that our current kind of leadership in the West, it's kind of swung a little bit alarmingly to the right.
Yeah.
And they're saying that this is also an extinction burst of this kind of old way of leading. Do you think this kind of mindfulness approach will ever reach into mainstream politics? Do you think it
Um,
will up there?
I need to speculate about that because it already has.
Okay.
Um, so I think it's more than 50% of the sitting MPs have been through an MBSR program. I might be slightly wrong on that statistic, but I know it's a significant proportion have been through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Um, so I think, obviously that's just an 8-week course. It's a fairly, beginner type of training. But it certainly gives people an idea of different ways of managing their stress, and an introduction to the practice of meditation in a secular way. So I think it's already informing things.
Yeah.
Um, but we've got to remember that, mindfulness feels like it's everywhere. And that's because everybody knows what it is now and everybody kind of likes the idea of it. Like it feels like, oh, it's quite now.
Yeah.
Like, but that doesn't mean that everyone's practicing, or that everyone is kind of gaining the depth of insight that can come from a committed meditation practice.
Yeah.
So we're still at the beginning of this conversation in a way, but things have moved quite rapidly. I mean, I came to market with the Conscious Professional in 2012 at a time when people hadn't heard of mindfulness yet and didn't want it in any way. So it was a tricky one to
Yeah.
build a business around that, and it took several years to start winning the trust of clients, by offering resilience programs and things like that, which then included a small amount of mindfulness, and then opening up the conversation because people who went on the course liked that aspect of it and wanted more. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we're at the beginning of all of this, but I think it does bode well. And I think I would agree, and I'm certainly very hopeful that what we're seeing as that sort of burst of almost a sort of parody of the right,
Yeah.
particularly states, is that kind of last cry of the beast energy as we're clearing out a lot of those forces, and allowing space for something new and transformative that we don't fully understand yet to be born, which I think we all hope will be more compassionate and better. So
Yeah, well, I mean, in the times that we're in now, if anyone, I don't know if anybody listens to my podcast, but if they do and they're listening to this in the future, we're kind of in the middle of this pandemic at the moment, and we're under lockdown. We're locked down at home, and we're in a position now where we can't go out. Many people are working from home and that sort of thing, but there is a kind of small number of people saying when we get back to normal, it doesn't have to be the old normal that we had before. It could be a new normal, a more compassionate normal. We're having time now, or some people are having time to focus on their spiritual practice, perhaps discover meditation to while away the hours and become present. Potentially there is hope for a sea change, perhaps. I mean,
yeah.
do you see that happening, or do you think it's going to be back to business as usual when we get back to it?
Yeah, I mean, my personal view is that the normal that we had before this already is gone. Like
Yeah,
that's, I don't think it can be reestablished in exactly the same format and structure that it was. And I think this sort of pandemic brings the energy of shock into our world in
yeah,
a global way, and allows us to notice ourselves as a species because we're all affected in some way by this, which is connective of our consciousness. So we kind of feel ourselves on different sides of the world, all going through this kind of roller coaster of emotions, fear and moments of joy, and then stress and anxiety, and what does it all mean? And some of those bigger questions, I think people have, some people have time to sit with those. Obviously, some people are on the front lines of this, and so it's a very different picture for them than it is for those of us who are kind of looking out from our windows at home. But I think there is an opportunity here for us to notice what's important as a collective, and to start bringing those things that we notice as important to the fore in our world through our businesses, and our creativity, and in our communities as we move forward from this. It's almost like you need to take stuff away to appreciate what you have, or what you've been gifted. So I think there's that as well.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the whole idea of what's important, I think, is changing anyway. That I think, from my personal opinion, society works in a way that it needs us to be slightly dissatisfied with where we are and what we've got in order to keep the wheels of commerce turning. For example, we need to be needing new stuff. We need to be dissatisfied with how we look, the house we live in, our career, because as soon as we become content and grateful for what we've got and where we are, the hunger is gone, and we no longer need to buy stuff anymore. Um, but now that the shops are shut anyway, and we can't turn to retail therapy to put a sticking plaster over the emptiness that's in here, we're looking for other things.
Going on, I hear. So yeah, I think that might still be an element of medication through shopping going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Amazon are doing very well out of this. Jeff Bezos is doing very well, but yeah, I mean, there is an opportunity at least to connect with something a bit more intrinsic to who we are as a species, I suppose.
I think so, and I think there are other ways in which we can still desire things and services. Um, but I think all we want is for them to feel more connected to some sort of purpose, some sort of value-based system that we can agree on. So I think that's probably the mission for businesses that want to survive with a bit more longevity beyond this, is to think about, well, where is the integrity in what they're creating and what they're offering the world? And if it's not obvious, shifting and finding things which they have expertise in, which they can bring to the market to actually create value for people. And I think that is, probably not going to happen across the board.
No.
I think the way in which society or capitalism works, in the way you framed it, we'll still see elements of that for quite a long time more. But I think there's a big move towards conscious capitalism, which is, connecting the creations of our economy with higher purposes. And I don't mean they don't have to be spiritual purposes, but with something that's values based. And I think brands that are able to do that, and then build conscious communities through their business, and really take care of all of the stakeholders involved in that process, rather than treating your stakeholders as sort of adversaries you need to get as much out of as possible. And these types of mentalities, I think, when we can exist as this sort of whole, and also have leaders within the business that are conscious leaders and committed to the values, then actually there's every reason to be optimistic. The book, if anyone's interested in these ideas, the book they might want to read is called Conscious Capitalism, by Mackie and Sisodia. Mackie's the Whole Foods CEO. I think Sisodia might be an academic, but they wrote a fantastic book together on that, which I found very inspiring and allows me to be optimistic about where.
And I suppose when it becomes profitable as well, to be much more compassionate in the way you do business and the way you produce your products and source your materials, then it's going to become a much more, the right way to do things from a kind of business point of view.
I mean, there's a whole section in the book which is the research which shows that businesses that are able to input the conscious model are more successful than their competitors. So even from a complete bottom line perspective, it's very much worthwhile doing. But it's quite complicated because it requires this shift in consciousness of the people within the business, which is then a culture change project, which, as we know, culture change within business is difficult, and often takes decades rather than a sort of swift turn to the left.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's funny, I interviewed very early on my podcast, I interviewed a Buddhist monk who was over from Seattle, I think it was. And we were talking about making the change and being the change, and how the world we live in and its values and its leadership structures is really a kind of manifestation of the collective feelings of the people of the planet. So we kind of have the world that we is suited to us, if you like. And I said, so how long does it have to take? What if it doesn't happen in our lifetime? And he said, well, if it doesn't happen in our lifetime, it doesn't happen in our lifetime. The main thing is that we move towards it. Even if it takes 100 years or 1,000 years, or even if it doesn't happen at all, just to try and be that change and to kind of walk a more natural path towards a kind of brighter future, if you like. Even if we never get there, it's just the will to have it is the important thing. And that's what we have to hold on to.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Our world is quite delicately balanced. The forces of this and that could really go in either direction at this point. And so for me, it's a pretty personal thing, isn't it? As to, well, what kind of makes my um, heart sing, and what gets me excited to get up in the morning and put my contribution out into the world. And I think that that is actually quite simple once you've tapped through and sort of allowed yourself just to sense into some of those deeper streams of what make you tick. That then it's like, well, I'm just making myself available in the world because this is what makes me joyful. This is what I stand for. I put it out there. Some people will respond this way and some that way, and that's all okay. And that's all we can do, really. You know.
I think
Um,
that is slightly the challenge, though. It is finding out what it is about you that makes you tick. I mean, a lot of people go their whole lives never really knowing what they're here for, what their passion is, and what they're supposed to do, because we have so many influences external to us saying, you know, go to school, go to college, get a job, do this, follow a career, become a barrister, for example. You know, your mother wants you to do this, your father wants you to do that, your teacher is saying something else, and you lose sense of in who I am and what I want out of life and what I have to offer. How can you reconnect to that? How can you strip everything away and find your true self so you can walk your true path, if you like?
yeah, so I think it would be easy to say, sort of just get quiet and listen,
Yeah,
and that kind of is what you have to do. But for people that find that difficult, um, it's about sort of laying the practical steps to allow them to walk towards the getting quiet and listening.
yeah,
Um, what I've noticed through my work with clients over the years is they usually do know, um, and a lot of it is about deconstructing the barriers within themselves to allow themselves to know it,
yeah.
accept the knowing of it, and then to stand up in the identity of that, and then to express that in the world. Um,
That can be
so
quite frightening at times, I guess, to
yeah,
accept that.
yeah, I think one of the scariest things as I was going through um, my career transition was letting go of the sentence "I am a barrister." So there's, if you say that in a, in a pub or at a drinks party or something, I'm a barrister. It's like, okay, get who
Yeah,
you are, sort of immediate. To go from that to, I don't know what I'm doing.
yeah.
Like, I am. What's going on? Which was, a good 3 years for me of like not knowing what it was, what I was kind of doing. Um,
I mean, it
that
must have been scary at the beginning when you first said, "I'm a, I am a barrister." When you first started that career, I mean, I remember when I started my career as a photographer, I felt strange saying I'm a photographer at the very beginning, because I felt like a fraud. I felt like I had this imposter syndrome thing
yeah.
going. And I mean, what do you say to people now when they say, "What do you do for a living? What's your job?"
So how do I reply to that when I get asked
Yeah,
that? Um, in most settings, I'll say I'm a mindfulness teacher.
yeah.
If it's just a sort of, casual sort of, encounter. If it's more professional, then I'll say, I'm founder of the Conscious Professional, and a little bit about what we do. But it does change a bit depending on the scenario and how I'm feeling on the day.
So
I'm also
do you ever get self-conscious about how people might react when you do say, "Oh, I'm a mindfulness teacher," or that sort of thing? I mean, do you ever so you don't worry about it?
no, um, yeah, no, I feel I'm not really looking for anything from them
Yeah,
in that scenario. I'm really just thinking, well, what do I want to chat about today
yeah.
with someone? So
Because I think that's the thing. We do attach so much value and so much self-worth to other people's opinions, you know, especially these days. We're looking for permission and approval and validation all the time. And, you know, we're looking on social media, we're looking for likes, we're looking to kind of we're looking for people to like us essentially and to approve of us. But actually, you're more likely to be liked and approved of and have permission and validation when you stop caring about all of that kind of stuff, and when you are walking your kind of natural path, if you like.
Yeah, I think they're probably separate things. Um, so obviously looking for validation in any format externally only gets us so far.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, that sort of deeper work of self-acceptance, and kind of making friends with yourself and being okay with who you are, and not trying to be something that you're not,
Yeah.
I think is a journey that we all go on, and is a tough one. But I think that's one thing. I think it's possible to be quite neutral in a way about social media. I don't think social media is, this sort of pit of negativity or anything like that. I think there's actually a lot of great learning and information sharing and connecting that goes on in that world. It's really what we bring to it, and how we interact with it, which we just need to be intentional about, I think, and be clear about what it is and what it isn't. Um, so yeah, I just sort of separate those things out a little bit.
So when you were going through your 3 years of I'm no longer a barrister. I went from I am a barrister to I am no longer a barrister. How long until you were able to say I am now the next thing? How did it all come together for you?
So in 2012, so I had the insight in 2008. I left my career as a barrister in, I think it was May 2009. And in the early summer of 2012, so 3 years later, I had another insight, um, that I was going to be teaching mindfulness. The business was going to be called The Conscious Professional. And I saw the logo, which is kind of this meditating man in outline. And that all just landed one day in a meditation. I was like,
Okay, so your
okay.
mind drifted and you were no longer focused on your breathing, but suddenly this idea came in your head, and
Yeah. So yeah, for me, the sort of the the sense of a insight is different than an idea
yeah,
in my practice.
okay,
So this felt like an insight rather than an idea. Um, and again, it had that energy of truth and clarity, which propelled me directly into action. So that was when I then got a designer to put the logo into, real life, created a website. Like there was a lot of actions that came out of the clarity, and it had taken over 3 years to get to that next piece of clarity in my process, because there was a lot of shedding, there's a lot of letting go,
yeah.
was um, to then make space for the new. Yeah.
I suppose that's the sense. I mean, one of the biggest things that I I went through a kind of similar part of the thing I like to explore on the podcast is this kind of transformation that we can go through to creating a life that is much more aligned with who we want to be, what our values are, this kind of thing. And I think we've all been on similar journeys. And I went on the journey. I ended up somewhere I didn't kind of know how I ended up there. I was working as a delivery driver um, for an online supermarket, and it's nothing wrong with that job. I enjoyed it a lot, and worked with some amazing people. But at the time, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, I'm a qualified journalist. I've spent 8 years in magazines. I've edited magazines in New York. I've worked on magazines in London. And here I am as a van driver, just really struggling to make ends meet. And then I went through this kind of process of introversion, and then discovered mindfulness meditation. And a lot of the keys to kind of getting back onto a path that's more aligned with who I am were to do with letting go, and letting go of ideas, notions of who I was supposed to be, notions of what the kind of the best way forward are, and all of this kind of thing. And I suppose that's what we do. We hold on to an awful lot of stuff which doesn't serve us, but is so connected to our identity that we really struggle to kind of understand that it's actually holding us back and has got us in a bit of a chokehold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can, um, yeah, similar experience. I had to let go of discipline for a while, which felt quite scary.
I can
So
imagine.
sort of the sort of hard work ethic, which, as a barrister, you got to, pick up your papers, go to court, come back, hand it in, pick up another set, go to court the next morning. Like, it's pretty relentless. You need a good discipline to make sure you're never late and show up for the clients and do a good job and all the rest of it. Know what you're talking about. Um, and then the sort of creative process of going back into an exploration of self and a complete sort of relook at who am I, that the bigger question, and then allowing that to then move into an informing the what do I do, so how do I make myself available in the world. um, there was a lot of letting go of things that had served me really well on the way to where I was, and which actually, to a certain extent, came back in later on in
Yeah.
different ways. But um, yeah, there was a lot of striving I had to let go of in order to make space to listen into some of those quieter, more creative spaces, to hear, the body, the being. They kind of whisper, they don't shout. So you really have to get quiet to notice those things.
Turn the volume down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I suppose this journey that you went on then later informed the conscious professional. So you're able to take what you learn and offer it to an external audience.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd been learning about these things since I was in my late teens, and so I was fairly knowledgeable in a non, I suppose, expert way at that point. Um, but having been through a career as a barrister, or part of a career as a barrister, there was now quite a useful kind of combination of, um, I kind of have walked where a lot of my clients have walked, and also have this passion for how we can um, increase our capacity to express excellence if we take a bit more care of how we operate internally. Um, and so I was able to kind of put those two worlds together, and bring in experts and other people that had more knowledge than me and so on, and create courses that would then be useful to people. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
how well is it generally received, this your kind of approach to a more mindful way of doing business and conducting ourselves in professional settings?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for me to answer that. People always are a bit surprised when I say I don't really get much pushback from people.
Okay.
Um, and I think there, in the room, people are always going to be polite. Like, there's always going to be some people who walk out and like, oh, that was a load of rubbish. Like, what a waste of time. But they're probably unlikely to say it to me unless they really hated it. And so, you don't get a lot of that in the room. Although I do work with quite a lot of lawyers, and having been one myself, I know lawyers are quite intolerant of training that they they find to be useless. Um, so what I've noticed over the years, and more and more, is a kind of hunger for it,
Yeah.
a desire for it, and also you give people permission to put their hand up and say, actually, I've been doing this for years.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's quite a few of those who would never have mentioned it before,
Yeah.
but because now it's sort of on the timetable of something that we look at and we say is important and relevant, you've got people who are prepared to say, yeah, this is something that helps keep me calm and stable and at my best, and I've been doing it all this time. So yeah, there's obviously a mix, but it's difficult for anyone to say it's nonsense at this point
Yeah,
because the science is so thorough, and grows exponentially every year, um, around this. So, mindfulness isn't a panacea, but I think we can say overall, unless there's a few specific exceptions, it is good for the human condition to create a bit of space to listen and
yeah,
develop skills around navigating your thoughts, emotions, and sensations, as of course it would be. Like, if you
yeah.
bring more skill to any area, you tend to operate a bit better. So,
Yeah,
um,
I interviewed a young lady for the podcast a little while ago, and she said that one of the best things you can bring to any relationship is a healthy, happy you. And I think that goes for intimate relationships with boyfriend or girlfriend, professional relationships, in the workplace, but also your relationship with yourself. I think it's really vital that you kind of nurture a sense of, well, contentment and happiness, and overcome those kind of anxieties of not being good enough or not performing well enough, um, in order to be able to operate at a better level, much more kind of optimized way, really, without fear and without too many internal obstacles.
yeah, absolutely. And you really can feel and know the difference, in groups and teams and relationships between people who've done the work on themselves and those that haven't. um, in a very general way, if we haven't made time and space to nurture ourselves, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're out in the world looking for the world to take care of you in some way. Whereas if you have put that work in, and of course there's going to be moments when there's ups and downs for everyone, all the rest of it, but on the whole, you're out in the world and you've done that work, and so you're generative. You actually have the energy and capacity to help others, to be at your best self, and all of that. So, in terms of, it's good for you, but it's good for everyone else.
Yep.
There's sort of no downside to self-care. Um, so yeah, it took me 3 years to understand that lesson when I started training with my meditation teacher, just before I left my job as a barrister. So good 13 years ago now. We spent the first 3 years with me learning the importance of self-care. And it took me that long to really get it and really understand why it's foundational.
Because I've always, or at least when I was starting out in the world of work, I always thought to be a good employee and to get ahead meant sacrificing yourself somehow and giving a little bit more than you were receiving. But of course, that just ends up with you burning out and becoming stressed and tired and withered away. But when you are in a kind of much more of a self-nurturing kind of way of being, it's beneficial in both ways.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to skip over very quickly to your books now. So there are two books. There's one on your website. I have made a note on my other screen. I'm just looking up now. So you've got the main one on Amazon is your conscious leadership book, and you also have 100 mindfulness meditations as well. What led you to write two books um, on these topics?
So I wrote the 100 mindfulness meditations first, and I'd been trying to write a book called The Conscious Professional for 4 years. And
Okay.
I'd done a lot of writing, but it never turned into a book. And then one day I had the idea to write a recipe book of meditations. Um, and the idea was so ripe, that 6 months later it was published and in the world.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it was like a really different experience of writing a book than the first try.
And were you
Um,
already in business as the conscious professional when you were trying to write this book? Okay.
yeah, yeah. So basically, almost from when I started the business in 2012, I'd sort of thought, oh, there'll be a book that goes along with this idea. Um, and then it didn't come out. And then 100 Mindfulness Meditations did. That came out in 2016. And then I was asked by a publisher to write a book, which was initially called Self Mastery rather than Conscious Leadership. But over the course of the writing, it evolved into being called Conscious Leadership. For me, they're quite similar. So the path of conscious leadership being really the path of self mastery. So that was again another joyful writing experience. I think I started writing that in January last year, and I'd finished writing it by the summer, and it was published in November. Yeah, it sort of taught me that you got to wait until a creative idea is ripe.
Yeah,
And yeah,
absolutely. I suppose again, it's about walking a path that is right for you, isn't it? I mean, you can't force a book if it's not ready to come out. It won't come out, or if it
no,
does, it'll be a poor, imitation of what it could be.
yeah,
So it has
yeah.
to be the right time, and I suppose you have to be in the right place for it as well.
I think so. Yeah, all of those factors. Yeah, it either happens or it doesn't happen. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people writing books like I was for 4 years, and yeah, it may not happen.
So I'm gonna just gonna move it on now to a little bit of a kind of the personal level. So talk a lot about the conscious professional and how it's good for business and how it's good for teams and this sort of thing. But you also do things like distance healing and these kind of things as well. So on a personal level, how do you generally work with people? Is it a coaching relationship that you have with people, or how does it work?
Yeah, so the I have another website which is just neilseligman.com, and that's more the sort of public access stuff, so books and retreats and one-to-one coaching and healing. Um, so it works, as you'd expect, really, in normal times. I like to be face to face with
Yeah,
people. At the moment, everything's being done online, which is fine. It still works nicely, but I do have a preference for face
yeah,
to face. And then, yeah, in my coaching style, I mean, I started offering healings quite soon after I trained as a Reiki master. So I was maybe 19 or 20. And yeah, it then turned out that the conversations I was having with people were as useful or sometimes more useful than the healings that I was doing. So I ended up training as a life coach as well and offering that too. And over the years, I've just learned to work intuitively with people.
yeah.
So listening deeply. And I seem to have a sense of just bringing people closer to themselves is kind of the direction I think a lot of the people that I work with are seeking in some ways to refine themselves.
Do you think that's what healing is? Because you hear a lot of people talking about healing, but you never really get an understanding of what that means. Is it literally just about getting past all the things that are hurting us and finding who we are again?
I think the healer's job is really to reduce fear.
Okay.
Um, the healer really doesn't really do the healing.
Right.
Once there is less fear in the system, the body and the being tend to come into balance and alignment of their own accord. Um, so yeah, if there's any sort of doing involved, um, it's really about creating safety and reducing fear, um, for someone who's going through something challenging or whatever, really. So yeah, I keep it simple in my sort of way of thinking about it like that.
So is there? I mean, is the job then of the healer really just as a more of a guide and a listener? Do you think?
I would describe, yeah. I mean, when I'm doing a healing session with someone, I what I'm actually doing is going into a state of deep listening and then responding with sound, touch, and movement. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it feels more like a dance than a. It's not like I'm actively trying to do something or anything. It's more like I'm just really present and listening, and then responding, um, and then yeah, whatever occurs for the other person is kind of their own experience. But um, yeah, that's it sounds it's tricky to talk about.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
I suppose you can't sort of write it down in 5 bullet points, but it's interesting. You call it a dance. I suppose it's about letting someone responding to someone and letting them come out and be who they are, and get rid of all the trappings that are getting in the way of that, and allowing them to just find themselves and their natural selves. Um, yeah, through listening, I suppose. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Fascinating. That's something I'd like to find out more about. I think if people did want to find out more about you and your books and your work, where would be the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so neilseligman.com is probably the easiest place to start from, and that also links through to the conscious professional if they are interested more from a corporate side. Um, so yeah, so there's those two different sites, and you'll also, there's my soul portrait work hidden in there as well. So
So tell me a little bit about that. How does that work?
yeah, so I'm also a photographer, and I created a process for witnessing people in their soul expression
Yeah.
and recording them in images. So I call them soul portraits. They're photographs taken in this very specific process, which is about a 2 hour healing um, using movement, sound, colored fabrics, and is a sort of portrait sitting unlike any normal expectation of what that would be like. And we do it in a dance studio, um, or sometimes get commissioned to do it in people's homes and things like that. But and then there are these watercolor looking images which come through, um, and they sort of hold the vibration of different aspects of the person.
So you kind of capture a moment of realization or awakening, or
It's very difficult to
yeah.
describe and explain. There is a 5 minute documentary video about it on the Soul Portrait Studio website, which is probably the easiest way of if people are curious of having a look and getting a sense of what a shoot would be like, and also seeing the images and so on. But it's probably the most uh, it's very intimate,
Yeah.
like on a spiritual level, um, and it's such an honor to do that work with people. Like, it's a really precious time when I get to do that with people. Um, yeah, I find it quite difficult to talk about it, but
Yeah.
it's yeah,
So it is a it's not just a photo session. It's a healing session as well, and then at the end of it, you almost have a kind of a memento of what you've just like a actual physical memento of what you've just been through and what you've experienced.
yeah, yeah. And some people almost think of the images as almost like they're a sort of personal tarot of images, that are linked to different aspects of themselves and so on. And I can do bits of coaching before and after if people want as well. And yeah, just kind of welcome them through the process.
Is there a specific moment when you find it's right to take the picture? Does it come? Is it something that you have to? Sometimes it comes quickly, and then that's the moment, and then other times you have to kind of work at it and draw it
It's
out.
it's I can tell that's a photographer's question.
Yeah,
Uh, a good question, but it's not like that.
yeah,
I'm working intuitively. Even sometimes I'm not even looking down the lens because I'm moving in all sorts of strange ways as well. So it's completely intuitive when it's kind of in that process with someone. And then the edit is also quite an intuitive process of feeling the energy of the pictures and finding the ones that hold the resonance.
yeah,
Um, so no, I don't know what the pictures are going to look like at all until I sort of find the little gifts in the camera at
yeah.
the end. So it's quite an interesting from a photographic point of view. It's yeah, very sort of has to be trusting.
I mean, it's very interesting. You talk a lot about movement. You've kind of referred to some of your kind of healing sessions as a dance. There's this kind of, I'm getting this kind of sense of the importance is the flow, and the importance in your own life is the flow. So perhaps when you're a barrister, or when someone is going down a path that isn't kind of aligned with who they are, there's that lack of real flow, and when you're aligned with your kind of true nature, that you have that sense of flow, and it expresses itself through your healing sessions, or through your kind of soul portraits, or whatever business you happen to be in. You might bake cakes for a living, but if that's your purpose, then you are in this sense of flow,
Yeah.
almost, I suppose. And is that what you're helping people to do, sort of guiding them into this kind of state of resonance and flow with their true nature?
Yeah, I mean that's a nice. I'd like to think I was helping people do that. Yeah, I mean that feels very aligned with what I stand for, and yeah, what I think I have worked hard to cultivate in my own life, um, and then also yeah, just kind of offer in different ways.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, movement has always been quite important to me. Like I as part of my personal practice, I go to things like Five Rhythms and some of those sort of dance meditation workshops around London, and yeah, I get a lot from doing that and bringing my my week, or whatever's going on in my world, into movement. I think is really important.
yeah,
Uh, so that's sort of become a part of my own self-care.
yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of stuff I need to go away and think about here, because yeah, I mean, you speak to kind of life coaches, and they kind of say, yeah, we just help people kind of decide what they want to do, and go and do it. But when you're talking to someone about kind of Reiki and healing and resonance and aligning with your true self, there's so many different directions you can go in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much for that. It's been
Yeah.
really eye-opening, and I'm going to have to explore a bit further, I think. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Neil is a really interesting guy. He really knows his stuff about mindfulness, and it's just all that stuff about getting aligned with your true self and your true nature really resonates with me. I don't know about you, but I found that really interesting. You can find out more about his stuff at neilseligman.com, and also his corporate workshops at theconsciousprofessional.com. And in the meantime, I've got a few more guests lined up. We're going to do some really interesting podcasts via Zoom, doing it remotely, and we'll see how that goes. So this one was a bit of an experiment, and let's hope we get better as we go along. All right, see you later.